Okay, hi everybody. Here is the lab demo for lab number one. Just wanted to give you guys a quick tutorial about where to find these lab demos. So if you go to our homepage for the iSite and you go up to the lab demos tab and you scroll down, you'll see that each of the lab demos will have um, right here in the columns, and we're going to be working on lab demo number one today. Once these videos are posted, they will be posted right here as a YouTube video so you can watch them over and over again. But again, we're going to be starting with the lab one demo, so you can go ahead and open this on your own computer and follow along if you'd like. I already have it open here in the tab. So here you can see today what we're going to be focusing on is the data management and cleaning of a data set. Now, when we do these lab demos, we are going to be using some dummy data. So we're not going to be using the same data that you're going to be using for your lab reports or your lab assignments. We're going to be using some kind of silly, small, but manageable data sets that come actually straight from your textbook. So at the top of each of the lab demos, we're going to have a call sign for the actual data, which we're going to be using for this lab. And today we're going to be using a data set that's called T Makes You Brainy. So if you go ahead and go into the drive of our G Drive folder, you'll see I can't actually post these SPSS files, SAV files on our iSite. So unfortunately, you're going to have to go into the folder itself in order to open up the SAV files that you'll need to follow along for the demo. Usually what I do is I go ahead and I open my my SPSS, and I'll go ahead and I'll open up the actual file itself once my SPSS is open. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. If you're on a Mac, sorry guys, can't really help you. But if you are on a PC, you can call SPSS down here. You can see it's one of the things that I open often. So you can go ahead and launch SPSS from there. It does take a little while to get that open. So for the purposes of this video, I already have it open. And here you can see that when you open SPSS, like we spoke about in class, you will have two different windows. You're going to have this window, which is called the data view. And here you can see all of the data lined up by columns, which are going to be each of the variables, and then the data actually comes down in different rows. And this should look very similar to an actual Excel spreadsheet, which we're all very used to looking at, right? So we have two variables in our data set here. We have number of cups of tea, and we also have cognitive function. Okay, but if we switch over to the variable view, this is something that Excel doesn't have. This is why we pay the big bucks to have SPSS at our fingertips. Here we're going to get a little bit more information about each of the variables that we have in our data set. And of course, again, with these demos, these are smaller versions of data sets. And when we work with our BRFIS data set, you're going to see a lot more variables and a lot more data. But again, this is the first time that we're doing this. So when we do these demos, we want to be working with something a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to handle. Okay, so if we go over here, we can see our cups of tea and cognitive function. So these are the names of our two variables. It tells us the type of variable. It tells us how wide the variable is, how many decimal places we want to have with our variables. And it also tells us the actual labels. Okay, so this is going to give us a little bit more information about what is contained in these variables. The variable name, as you can see, has no spaces. You're not allowed to have any spaces, and you really shouldn't have any dots either with your variable name. So you can either name them with underscores here, like this data set has. You can use capital letters with no underscore. You could use no spaces. You can really call it whatever you want, but you're not allowed to have any spaces here. Underscores are okay, but spaces are not. But here in the label section, this can be as long as you want. It can have as many spaces as you want. This is sort of a way for you to remember what is contained in this variable. Okay, if there were any values, they would be listed here. If there were any missing values, they would be listed here. And basically, you're able to construct your whole data set here. You can change any of these, but with the demos, they're going to kind of come packaged and ready for us. But I'll tell you a little bit more about how we might have to change these as we go along in the demo. So again, if we go back to the demo itself, we can follow along here. And this is meant for your notes. So please go ahead and save your own Lab 1 demo to your own folder so that this can become a place where you can take notes throughout the demo itself. So here, part 1, we want to describe the data set. Okay, so we've already opened SPSS. It's best if you have this T Makes You Brainy, if you download this and you actually save it either to a file on your desktop or to your desktop itself. It's easier to manage that way than trying to work within the Google folder, okay? And so we've already looked here that we have a data view. So again, let's go back here. This is our data view. And then we also have a variable view. Let's go back over here. This is our variable view. Those are the two screens that actually speak together to describe the entire data set and how it sits in SPSS. Okay, and what we want to do now is we want to explore the data set and complete our table 1. So again, download one of these docs, save it as, Lab 1 demo, your last name. So I would save it as Lab 1 demo, George. And then go ahead and follow along as we move through this demo. So you can add your notes in this section here. You can add answers to any of the questions that I ask. So you'll have a more complete version of the demo as we walk through it today. All right, so let's go through here and try to add our actual answers to this table 1 here. Okay, so again, what we're going to try to do here in table 1 is really describe what we are seeing in our data set, our T Makes You Brainy data set. Okay, so if we want to understand how many participants are in our data set, again, we're going to go back to this window here. And the best way to understand how many participants are in the data set as it is right now is to go to data view. Now, if this was huge and we had, hundreds of thousands of participants, it might be a little bit easier to use a statistical test in order to tell us how many people are here. But if we just look and we can count down here, we can see that there are 15 participants in our study. There are 15 data points in our study. Okay, so we can go back here to number of participants and go ahead and just write in 15. Okay, so we've already answered this question, how many variables there are. Okay, but again, the best way to understand that is to go here to variable view, and we can just scroll right down here and see that there are 2 variables. Again, this seems very simple because we're using kind of a dummy data set, something that's very simple to start with. But when we get to using the Burfist data set for our lab assignments, answering these questions might be a little bit more difficult because there's going to be a lot more participants and many more variables to deal with. But again, we're going to start small. So when we want to know the number of participants, we're going to go to data view. And when we want to know the number of variables, we're going to go to variable view. So if we go back here, we can see that there are 2 variables. And if we want to understand the type of variable, again, we're going to stay in this variable view. We can go over here and we can understand what type of measurement we have here. They're scales. And then if we want to understand what type of variable they are in this data set, they are numeric. Okay, and SPSS is going to automatically tell you that they are numeric as long as when you load in your data, everything in the data view is actually a number. Okay, so if we go through and we're looking here and there was, for whatever reason, a name, or it said missing, or something other than an actual number, then SPSS would not automatically say that this was a numeric or a scaled measurement used here. But again, this is very simplified, very straightforward. So we can go back here and say what the type of variables are. They are, in fact, numeric. Okay, now is there any missing data? Where would we go to find this? Again, I think the best place to go and see if we can find this is going to be in the data view. There are only 15 entries, so we can scan through it quite easily and see that all of the cups of tea are filled in. Nothing is missing there. And if we go to cognitive function, we can see all the way down, nothing is missing. So if I go back here, as of right now, missing data, there's none. Okay, so again, what I want you to do is I want you to be following along with this video. This is something that I'm recording, so you can kind of play this over and over again, or you can zoom ahead to the piece of the demo where you either zoned out or it got kind of confusing and you didn't raise your hand, or I wasn't able to get to you fast enough. So that's really why we're doing these recordings, but I do want you to kind of follow along as we go through. So now we're going to go on to part 2, and we're going to enter in some new data. So perhaps you're doing a study and you want to make sure that you're keeping really good track, really good management of your data, but all of a sudden you have more participants who've completed your survey and you want to upload some new data. Now you can do this manually, which is what we're going to do today because we only have 5 new participants to enter. There are some fancier ways that you can use, which we'll get to if we need to, that you might use during your capstone year to pull in new data automatically using some SPSS commands. But for today, again, we're going to keep it simple. And so what we have here is table 2 is our fake data. Okay, so we're actually going to go in, we're going to change the data set that Andy Field so lovingly has already given us. Okay, so I'm going to try to toggle back and forth, and I want you guys to follow along and do the same thing here. So if we go here to the Tea Makes You Brainy, we're going to add new participants. So I think this was a 5 and this was a 70. Okay, so just toggle back and forth. It looks like, oops, we're going to have some missingness now. So we're going to keep that in mind. So number 17 drinks 2 cups of tea a day, but for whatever reason didn't give us a cognitive function. And you can see here that once you enter in that line 17, SPSS will automatically put a period or a small little dot. No, that is not, a piece of dust on your screen. That's an actual data point there, and it's a missing data point. Okay, so SPSS automatically will enter that in for any variables that should be there, but we don't have data. This person, for whatever reason, didn't give us their cognitive function score. All right, so we're going to go back here. So 18, this person is missing, but missing in a slightly different way. So they gave us that they had a 50 on their cognitive score, but they neglected to tell us how much tea they drink every day. So again, we're going to have 19, 1, and 30. 1 cup of tea, cognitive score of 30, and then number 20 here has 4 cups of tea a day and a cognitive function score of 65. So that's 4 and 65. And as you can see here, we can enter in data in exactly the same way as we would in an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, we can copy and paste it, or we can enter it manually. Again, I just wanted to show you that you can enter it manually. There are more complicated ways to do this, but we are going to keep it very simple for today. So now our data set looks a little bit different. If we were going to go back to table 1 and to update how many participants we have, we can see now that we've entered 5 new data points, giving us 20 total participants in our data set now. Okay, so you can see from the entering the data above that, we've created ourselves a little bit of a problem. And you can see here that we actually have some missingness that we have to deal with. And I think this is a good place to just sort of pause and talk about a couple of different ways that we can deal with missingness in our data sets. Missingness is a foregone conclusion. We will always have participants. We are dealing with humans who mess up, who miss a page, who don't answer questions, who get bored, who want to move on, and we have to deal with missingness. Okay, so the easiest thing to do would just be to ignore the missingness. It is important to understand how the statistical package that you're using is going to deal with that missingness. Okay, so with SPSS, if you just ignore missingness and you continue on your merry way, SPSS will also just ignore the missing variables. However, if you're doing something that's a little bit more complicated and you're using multiple variables at a time, if any one variable is missing, it will delete the entire row, leaving you with a perfectly square and full data set in those more complicated like regression analyses that you ask SPSS to use. So it's just a matter of understanding what your statistical package will do for you automatically. Okay, if you have a lot of missingness, just ignoring it is really not the way to go. If you have a lot of missingness, doing something called imputation or filling in the blanks, filling in those missing variables is probably a better bet. Now, there are very complicated ways of doing this, but a couple of simple things would just be to take the mean value of that column and then insert that mean value into the missing data point. So for example, here we have number 18, participant number 18 forgot to tell us how many cups of tea they had. We can just assume, instead of having it be missing, that they were kind of at the average, right? So basically everybody, let's say, drinks an average, if we look over the 20 people that are in here, the 19 of them that gave us the cups of tea, we could average that out and then insert or impute that missingness and then add whatever that mean value is here to the cups of tea for number 18. We could do the same thing here for number 17. Take the mean value of the cognitive function score and then put it in here for number 17 that's missing. Now, you can also do this by looking at related observations, which means, okay, I'm going to look here at 18. Looks like they had a 50 in terms of their cognitive function score. And if I go to the data here and I look and I can see, did anyone score kind of close to a 50? No, nobody scored exactly a 50, but this one had a 54. And number 13 had 3 cups of tea, so I could impute 3 here, thinking that, well, 54 is pretty close to 50, and if I think that there's something to do with an association between cups of tea and cognitive function, you can use other data points to help inform that. You could do the same thing here. Okay, I see that this person had 2 cups of tea and they scored a 60, so you could fill in 60 here. And again, there are pluses and minuses for dealing with missing variables in that way, but it is important to let your reader know how you are going to be dealing with missingness, and that usually goes in the methods section of a manuscript, and that will definitely go in the methods section of any lab report that you turn in for me. You have to tell me how it is you are going to deal with missingness. Okay? Okay, so now let's create some new variables. So as you can see, the cups of tea is a continuous variable, and that's because that's what our fearless leader, Andy Field, decided cups of tea should be. But as we will come to know, dealing with continuous variables can sometimes be a little bit more tricky, difficult, as opposed to dealing with dichotomous variables, or variables that are just 2 levels. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make things a little easier on ourselves. And what we're going to do is we're going to take cups of tea, this variable right here, and we're going to make it a categorical variable. And we're going to make it a dichotomous variable, which means it has 2 levels, dichotomous, 2 levels. And we want, if you drink just 1 or 2 cups of tea, we want you to be categorized as a moderate tea drinker. And then if you drink 3 or more cups of tea, we want you to be categorized as a heavy tea drinker. Okay, so let's go to SPSS and make this happen. I also, sorry, let's go back here for a second. I also sort of have like a play-by-play here, going through exactly what the what you need to do in SPSS and some screenshots to help you follow along. But I'm going to do this sort of live, but you can always come back here to the demo if you want to do that. So basically what we want to do here is we want to go up to the information bar up here, and we want to click on transform, and we want to recode into a different variable. So we're going to go ahead and click that. And all of a sudden this, this will pop up. Now I've gone through and run this already. So you can see here that we have cups of tea. And what we want to do is we want this variable here, this cup of tea, which is the original Andy Field variable. We want to change it into cups of tea underscore cat. So I was able to write that here. And when I go into the label, of course, I can enter in exactly what I want the label to be. And just remember that when we're in the name variable, we're not allowed to have any spaces. SPSS doesn't want any spaces in the name variable. But down here in the label variable, that's really where we can kind of give it some more information. So we have a high, low, 2 categories. That's all good to go. I think I just have to change this for whatever reason to make sure that I can change it through. And so we have that here. But now we need to go and assign it new and old values. And we can come down here to the range. I'm just going to go ahead and reset everything so that we can do this from scratch. So again, we want to pull in cups of tea. We want to name it cups underscore of underscore tea underscore cat. And this is, let's see, cups of tea with 2 levels, high and low, or something like that. Whatever we want to say and change it. So that goes through there. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we're going to go to the old new values, and it's completely reset. It's easier to do it from scratch. So usually when you have a continuous variable and you want to make it a dichotomous variable, the easiest way to do that is through these ranges here. You can also do that for values. So you could say values 1 and 2, or you could say a range values 1 through 2. I like to do this. It just makes the most sense to me, and I have to know I don't have to know as much about the continuous variable, but just to make it as simple as possible, let's just say that we're going to do this range here. So we're going to say 1 cup of tea through 2 cups of tea is going to be a new value of 0. So it's 1 through 2 is 0. And then we're going to say 3, actually let's do this. Let's say 3 through the highest. I think it's 5 cups of tea is the highest, but I can't remember. So I'm going to say it this way. So 3 through the highest, that new value is going to be a 1. So I'm going to go ahead and say add. So we have basically the low end of the old version is going to be 1 and 2, and then the new version is going to be 0. Old version is 3 through the highest, and that's going to be 1. And that's what we want it to look like. So we're going to go ahead and say continue. Okay. And so now we can click on OK. And we can see here that our output screen for the first time is popping up. So this is the other screen that a lot of times will pop up, and students will try to close it very quickly. But this is basically just the record of any changes to your data set that you've made while SPSS has been open. So I would not close this. You can just minimize this, and you can get back to the screen that we've been working with. Okay. So if we go to variable view now, we can see that we have 3 variables, including this new one that we created. I never like to keep decimal places that are just zeros. I don't think it makes a lot of sense, and it kind of makes everything look a little bit silly. So the only other thing that we're going to need to do here is we're going to need to add the values, okay? So before I forget exactly what we did, we decided that 0 was going to be a moderate tea drinker. And then 1 was going to be a heavy tea drinker, Okay, and now we're adding all of the information that was in that table forward in our demo. So we're going to go ahead and say okay. And now the values here includes 0 and 1. We can click on that and always understand what that is. Okay, so again, this is a way to sort of manage your data set and keep it clean so that the next time you come back to this data set and you're like, wait a second, I created this categorical variable, but I don't know what ones and twos equal. Well, what you can go ahead and do is you can just save it with these new values. And so the next time you come back, you'll have that reminder already set in your data set. And again, if we go here to the data view, you can see here that if you drink 2 cups of tea, this is the old variable, you'd have 0. So you'd be okay. So now that we have our new variable, what we want to do now is we want to actually start some analysis. So one of the things that we're going to do over the course of the semester and really try to perfect our tool in our Biostats toolbox is the idea of skeleton tables. Skeleton tables is a really made up concept. I doubt you're going to find this in any textbook, but it's something that really helps me when I'm thinking about my analysis. What I like to do is I like to sort of create my tables, give it the skeleton, give it the bones of what it is you want to say before you actually go to SPSS. Because sometimes when I get to SPSS, I get a little bit confused. It's like, what am I supposed to be running? How am I supposed to be analyzing? I just sort of get lost. But if I've already created my skeleton table, it'll be really clear to me what numbers I need to get from SPSS to then load into the table. Also, these skeleton tables, once they're filled in, once you add the meat to the bones of the skeleton table, they become a really wonderful way to show your reader what it is you found numerically in a table. We see these types of tables all the time filled in when we read the published literature. Okay, so right now we have a nice clean data set, and now we want to use SPSS to answer our research questions of interest. So what we need to do is we need to create these questions. And because we're starting out very simply, very slowly, we want to make sure that these questions are very, very simple. So similar to the questions that you guys came up with for your Meta 1, these need to be very, very simple and use only one variable at a time. So for example, what is the average number of tea that people consume in our study population? What is the median tea consumption in our study population? Both of those questions use only one variable, and it is the continuous cups of tea variable that Andy Field has given us. Another 2 very simple questions that we could ask is, what's the average cognitive function in our study population? What's the median cognitive function in our study population? So if these are our research questions, again, very simple, very straightforward, using only one variable at a time, and not even using our new variable that we just created. We'll get there in a second. We can create a skeleton table. This is really what the skeleton table is going to look like. So table 5 here is a univariate results. Okay, we have listed here what those variables are, and this is the key to my skeleton table that's going to be helpful for me when I get to SPSS. If I know to answer question number 1, I want the average. Well, another word for average is mean. And so I'm going to say tea consumption, which is going to give me the key as to what variable I need to be using. And then I'm going to say to myself, I want the mean or the average. And so I'm going to remind myself of this and tell myself what type of statistical program or statistical test I want to run when I get to my program. Okay, and then I have the same thing here for the median, cognitive function mean, and then cognitive function median. One other important thing to notice in my skeleton table is I also have this here. This is a standard deviation or an interquartile range. One of the important things to remember is whenever we grab a statistic from SPSS, it's very important to grab the supporting statistic to tell us what the variability is in that number. So just giving me the mean in terms of the number of the average number of cups of tea that my population is going to drink, I have no idea how much variability comes along with that mean unless I also have the SD. Okay, so that SD tells me how much variation is in my population. And so I kind of talk about these as like your ketchup and your mustard or your peanut butter and your jelly. They always go together. If you have just one of them, you're not complete. Use your salt and pepper, okay? You need both in order for your skeleton table to be complete. So I also have a note here. Anytime I have a mean, I also want my standard deviation. And anytime I call a interquartile range, anytime I have a median, I also want my interquartile range. Okay, so here we are in SPSS, and now it's time to actually do some of our analysis. So we're going to go up to Analyze. We're going to go down to Descriptive Statistics, and we're going to go to Descriptives. Okay, and remember, we want the mean for both number of cups of tea and then also cognitive function. You can pull over both variables at the same time, and you can just run one analyze to get both of the means that we want for our skeleton table. So let's go ahead and press OK. And now again, that output window that's sort of giving us a play-by-play of what we are running is going to automatically pop up and give us the answers to our questions. Okay, so here in the descriptive statistics, we can see the number of cups of tea and the cognitive function. Oops. It's also going to give us the mean and the standard deviation. So SPSS already knows that we need both of those numbers, both the mean itself, so the point value or the point estimate, but then also a measurement of the variation, which is the standard deviation. So we have both of those numbers here. So what we can do is we can go back here and we can actually fill this in. So what was it? It was like 3.11, and then the standard deviation was what? Let's go back here. Sorry, I can't memorize anything. It's 1.4. Okay, so we go back here, and it's 1.4. Okay, so we want to go ahead and fill that in. We can go ahead and fill cognitive function in as well. So if we go back to SPSS, whoops, the output window, 49.32 and 11.26. Let's see if I can remember those numbers. 49.32, 49.32, and this was like 11.24. I think that's right. All right, so again, it's confusing when we get to SPSS. Analyze, descriptives, descriptive statistics, all of those things, I get confused, right? But if we have our skeleton table, it will always anchor us to the correct analysis and call signs that we need to have when we get to our SPSS, which can be a little bit intimidating sometimes. Okay, so now what we need to do is we see that we still have two more statistical measures that we have to fill in here. So let's go back to our SPSS and let's go up to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics again. But in order to get the median and the interquartile range, we have to go down to Explore. So again, let's pull over our two variables that we want to understand what the median and the interquartile range is. And we can go ahead and say, yes, we can just leave it like this, but I don't necessarily need to deal with the plots right now. All I really want are the statistics. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And then all of a sudden my output window pops up again, and I can see here that we have the median for number of cups of tea, and we also have the median for cognitive function score. It's also going to give us the interquartile range, which is right here, and also right down here. You can see that we also have the mean, and we should, yes, also have the standard deviation. So technically what we could have done to fill in our entire skeleton table there is just do the Explore variable. But if you're only looking for the mean and the standard deviation, and all you need is this information, whoops, this information up here, you can just run your descriptives under the Descriptive Statistics tab. So again, there are multiple ways to get at our answer. You can just do the Explore, or you can do, you can kind of break it up like we did here. Again, we're just trying to teach, we're just trying to learn here. So this might not be the fastest way to do things, but I do want to just sort of let you know what all of these different functions are in SPSS. So we can go in and we can fill in these numbers now. Okay, so moving right along here in our demo, now instead of just looking at one variable at a time, we're going to want to look at two variables. We're going to want to look at the dichotomous variable that we created, moderate versus heavy tea drinkers, but we're also going to want to use cognitive score at the same time. So this is a bivariate analysis using two variables at the same time. So just like before, we're going to start with some some questions, some research questions of interest. So first of all, we want to know of the population, how many tea drinkers are moderate tea drinkers, how many are heavy, and that's where we're going to fill in with the number and the percentage, the peanut butter and the jelly, okay? But then what we want to know is, on average, what is the cognitive score of those heavy tea drinkers? And of those moderate tea drinkers, what's their average cognitive score? And in order to do this, we're going to have to kind of break it up. We're going to have to use the frequencies function in order to get these two numbers up here. And then we're going to have to go back into the explore function to get the cognitive score. Okay, so let's go do the first part first. Keep it simple. So if we go up here, we go to Analyze, and we go down to Descriptive Statistics. Let's click on the frequencies. And here we're going to want to pull over our cups of tea, and we're just going to want to go and say OK. So here we can see that there are 7 people in our data set that are moderate tea drinkers, and that equates to 35% of the total data set, and especially we want to use we can use the valid percent if you want to. That basically ignores the missing, or you can use the percentage here, which is 35. Oops. Double click, which includes the fact that we do have one person missing, and we remember that, okay? So depending on whether you want to ignore missingness or include missingness, you either use the percent if you want to not ignore missingness, and if you do want to ignore missingness, you're going to use the valid percent here. So we can see here that we have 7 moderate tea drinkers and 12 heavy tea drinkers. So we can go back in and we can fill in part of our table here. So what did I say? It was, it was 7, and that was 36.4% or something like that. And then this was 12. And I forget what that percentage was, but it's going to add up to 100, but I can't do that in my head. So this is 63.2. This is 63.2. Okay, so now we have those filled out here. And now what we need to do is we need to go and use the explore function to find out the cognitive score within the moderate tea drinkers and the cognitive score within the heavy tea drinkers. Okay, so again, what we want to do now is sort of the second part, the true bivariate part of this question. So in order to do that, we're going to go over here into SPSS, and we want to go to Analyze, and we want to go to Descriptive Statistics and then Explore. But here what we want to do is we want to make sure, let's just reset this. We want to make sure that our cups of tea is in the factor list, and then the dependent variable list is the cognitive function score. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't click the plots. We just want to look at the statistics. The plots are just going to be a little bit too much information in order to fill in our table here. So let's go ahead and press OK. And here we can see exactly what we want. We have the mean within the moderate tea drinkers, which is 47. And then the mean with cognitive score within the heavy tea drinkers is 50. So we can go back and we can actually enter that in. Let's make sure that we also have our standard deviations. And we can go back here to our table, and we can fill in those two numbers there. Okay, so last part of this lab demo is part 6, and this is really one of the most important parts of the lab because this is the applied part of this applied biostatistics class. We need to synthesize our results. It's not enough to just give your readers a table and let them kind of figure out the numbers on their own. You, as the researcher, need to help them and sort of guide them through what you think is happening. So without that interpretation, the results are really not as meaningful. Okay, so what I have here is a sentence that we can kind of fill in with numbers, but as you can see, it's a sentence with English words. So what we have here is study participants who are moderate tea drinkers had blank cognitive scores. And so if we fill in the mean, here, forget it here, I think this was 47.0, and excuse me if these numbers are a little bit off. I think this was like 10.6 or something like that. And let's go back here. So we have, this was 52.4. And where is the standard deviation was 12.3. Let's see if I can remember that. This was 50.4. And I already forget what this was, 12.3 or something like that. If those numbers are wrong, please forgive me. But if we look at this, now our moderate tea drinkers, do they have higher or do they have lower cognitive scores than the heavy tea drinkers? It's a 47 versus 50. So it actually looks like those heavy tea drinkers have a higher cognitive score. So if we fill in this here, study participants who had moderate tea drinkers actually had, this should be lower cognitive scores than people who were heavy tea drinkers, okay? And that lower really gives your reader an idea of how the cognitive score and the tea drinking, how those two variables relate to one another, okay? And that's the interpretation that is so important here. Okay, and just a couple of different notes here, just sort of as we become accustomed to dealing with SPSS. Whenever you change your data set, whether it's to add a variable or to add new data, it's always a good idea to save that data set as a new name. And because I can't come up with new names, I usually just do like a save the data set as whatever date it was. And that's just a good key for data management. So as you go through, the next time you're going to come and call up your data set, you can always look for the most recent version of that data set. That way, if you ever make a mistake, which of course none of us are ever going to make a mistake, like you delete the wrong variable or you change something that you didn't quite like, you don't have to go back to the beginning. You don't have to go back to the original data set. You can just go back a couple of weeks and then continue on from there. So you're never losing too much of your work if you kind of save as you go along. The other thing, and we sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier in the demo, but the output window in SPSS is very, very useful. It shows you any of the changes that you've made or whatever tests that you've run that day. So you can also think of this as sort of a step-by-step guide as to what it is you did that day. So if you go through and you actually save your output again with the date, that will match up with your data set as to where it is. A lot of times students will just delete the output and they won't save it. I find it actually extremely helpful because that way you can always go back and you can say, okay, how did I do the mean? The code for that mean is actually in the output window. So if you just go up here, it shows you that in order to understand this bivariate analysis, we use the Explore tab, right? And we use cognitive function and then the cups of tea categorical. And this is showing us all of the different things that we wanted it to do. And then all of our different results are listed here. So this is the output window. And as you can see here, it hasn't been named yet because I haven't saved it. But I can go ahead and save this and keep it with my demo 1 so I have a record of all of the things that I did in demo 1 to go along with the demo itself. Again, totally up to you. This is not something that is required, but for good data management, I think it's important to note here. Okay, all right, that is the end of demo 1. You guys made it. You can replay this video 0 times or 100 times, but definitely keep it somewhere so the next time you have to go and do this by yourself, perhaps for lab 1, you have a record of what we did here.